Hi all, good morning. This is Dr. S.J. Kala, an Associate Professor of English at Fatima College, Madurai. So, today we're going to continue with Susan Sontag's Against Interpretation. You know that we have already done with two parts, and this is the third one. And now here I'm going to begin with how interpretation is rife in the American literature. You see that interpretation is quite rampant in the Americas, and there you find arts with a feeble and negligible avant-garde. Now, what is this avant-garde? We've all heard of this term quite often. So, avant-garde is nothing but something that's new and something that upholds experimental ideas as well as methods, not just in literature but in art and music as well. So, here Sontag tries to tell us about how interpretation has become too rampant in America, especially with even the newer forms of fiction and drama coming in. And she says that most American novelists and playwrights are actually journalists, or they are gentlemen sociologists and psychologists who she feels is when they write a kind of literary piece that's equivalent to program music. Now, what is this program music? This is a sort of instrumental music where a story or a scene that evokes a specific idea or emotion through musical means is performed or rendered, and through that you draw inspiration from not just the realm of music or literature but even beyond the realms of music or literature. So here when he's talking about the program music, when she's talking about the program music, she says that the literary equivalent of the program music is so rudimentary, so uninspired, and it's not dynamic, it's stagnant, and therefore it looks like there is something that has undergone with the level of form in fiction as well as in drama. And then she says that it is not that even when the content is simple, just in the form of an information, okay, and especially when there is a kind of a peculiar visibility, you find that the novels and plays in America, unlike poetry and painting and music, they do not exhibit concern with changes in their form. Still, they don't seem to be really new and different and all that in their forms, but still their arts are also not spared. They are also assaulted by interpretation. So we see that there is a kind of focus on both form as well as content. So now looking into the programmatic avant-gardism, we find that it has been experimenting with form. So when there is a new kind of a form evolving, it happens at the expense of content. And it is not only the defense against infestation of art by interpretation. So here they are not trying to safeguard themselves from interpretation, but it looks like the art is constantly or perpetually running away from all such interpretations, and the distinction between the form and content seem to be a kind of an illusion. Okay, so here we find that, take for example the works of art. We try to find ways from which it can escape or elude interpretations or interpreters. So how can this be done? This can be done by making works of art where the surface is so unified and clean, and where there is a kind of a rapid momentum also, and we find that the address is just direct, there's nothing deeper into it. But still, can we look at the work of art at it as it is or what it is? So Sontag questions, is this possible now in this particular era where interpretations are really rampant? And then for a moment she pauses and wonders if interpretation is only pertaining to literature. And so she starts questioning that, and she wonders if it has something to do with the films. So, from the arena of literature, she leaps on to the field of cinema. Now, she finds that cinema is the most alive, the most exciting, and the most important of all art forms, especially in this present millennium. So now she stops to ponder on how alive this particular art form is, and she says by the latitude, we understand that by the latitude, when we say by the scope of freedom that it has to act and to think, what by the act, by the scope of freedom in acting and thinking that a film has or a movie has, we tend to mistake or have a misunderstanding that everything is good, and that's why there is no misinterpretation. But she differs from that, and she focuses on the films of Bergman. Now, who is this Bergman? This Bergman, his full name is Ernest Ingmar Bergman, and he is a Swedish film and theatre director and screenwriter, and he's considered as one of the greatest and most influential directors of all time. And he is known popularly for four of his most important works. The first being The Seventh Seal, next Wild Strawberries, then Persona, and then Fanny and Alexander. Okay, so this is about Bergman. So now what does Sontag have to tell us about Bergman? She says, take for example a few of the films of Bergman. They might appear to be too overloaded or crammed with just ordinary or lame messages about the modernity and the modern spirit and all that. So when they do that, the film naturally invites interpretations. But then there is always a triumph over the pretentious intentions of their director. That is to say, it somehow escapes interpretations because the director has pretentious intentions. So now what do you mean by pretentious? You tend to attempt to impress by affecting a greater importance. So that's what it is. So now she goes further to tell us about two of Bergman's films, one being The Winter Light and the other titled The Silence. Now, Winter Light is nothing but, and Silence, they are both Bergman's films which were released in the year 1963. Winter Light is a tragedy in Swedish. It's titled as Nattvardsgästerna. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's literally transliterated as the communicants. Okay, so that's to do with the Winter Light. And now coming on to the film The Silence, you find that that's a drama film written and directed by Ingmar Bergman, and this is the third one in the series. It has its series, and the first being the film Through a Glass Darkly, which was released in 1961, and thereafter it's the Winter Light, and then it's then the third one is the Silence. This particular drama or film, when I say drama, the family drama, it deals with two sisters, the older sister being more intellectually oriented and the younger one being very quite sensuous, and she has got a son also, young son also. So this is about it. So we get to know about the sensuousness of the younger sister. And now, take for example these two films. You find that this film is very beautiful. It captivates the audience attention through its beauty and visual sophistication of the images. But then all these try to put down or bring down the pseudo intellectuality of the story. The callow pseudo-intellectuality, callow meaning the immature pseudo-intellectuality of the story. So it's not that the films are always perfect. There also you find some flaws in the form of the content, in the form of the story, or in the form of the dialogue. But what overtakes them is the beauty and the visual sophistication, and this has been observed in D.W. Griffith's works also. So the next one is, so in good films, there is always a kind of a directness And that it is this directness that frees us from all of these interpretations, and nobody tends to interpret them. So from Bergman, Sontag moves on to old Hollywood movies or films, and she focuses upon three important directors: Cukor, Walsh, and Hawks. Now, here are a few inputs on Cukor. George Dewey Cukor is an American film director who concentrated solely on comedies and literary adaptations, and he is known for adapting Little Women into a movie. Then we have Walsh, whose full name is Raoul Walsh, but he was born as Albert Edward Walsh, and he's an American film director and actor, and he has been influencing many of the directors who came up later, like Rainer Werner Fassbinder and Jack Hill, Martin Scorsese, and so on. Now, regarding Howard Hawks, we find that Howard Hawks is a prominent American director, producer, and screenwriter known for his work in classic Hollywood cinemas. And he directed a wide range of genres, ranging from adventure movies, comedies, crime movies, war movies, musicals, as science fictions, and so on. So these three directors seem to have seem to have focused upon a kind of an anti-symbolic quality that's quite liberating, and it's not less than the European directors also. So when he talks about, so he says, like these people, the European directors also have been focusing upon it, like Truffaut. Now, who's this Truffaut? He is known as Francois Roland Truffaut, a French filmmaker. And his movie, The Shoot the Piano Player, was released in 1960, and it's a French new wave crime drama. Likewise, his Jules and Jim, which was released in 1962, also belongs to this French new wave series of drama, and this falls under the category of French new wave romantic drama. So, if that's to do with Truffaut, we have Godard, and Godard has this name, full name as Jean-Luc Godard, L-U-C. Okay, Jean-Luc Godard. He's a French and Swiss film director, a screenwriter, and a film critic, and he is considered to be one of the pioneers of the French New Wave film movement, which emerged in the 1960s, and he criticized the mainstream French cinemas, which claimed themselves, which claimed that they were the tradition of quality, but he rather started championing Hollywood directors like Alfred Hitchcock, Howard Hawks, and so on, and he promoted their movies. And so, as we saw, Truffaut also belonged to the new French New Wave film movement, and with Godard being its pioneer. So his movie Breathless was released in 1960, and it is categorized under French New Wave crime drama film. Then we have Sontag telling us about Godard's Vivre sa vie. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly because it's a French title, which means to live her life, released in 1962, and it's also a French New Wave drama film. Okay, so this is to do with the French directors. Then we have Antonioni's La Ventura. This Antonioni is Michelangelo Antonioni, an Italian film director who is known popularly for his trilogy on modernity and its discontents. So what are the trilogy? La Ventura being the first one, which was released in 1960, and it's a drama film. They're followed by La Notte in 1961 and La Classe in 1962. And then we have Olmi. Now, Olmi is Ermanno Olmi. He's an Italian film director and screenwriter. This film director and screenwriter, he blended Italian neorealism with Christian humanism. So with regard to his movie, The Fiancés, which was released in 1963, we get to know that it was screened in a competition. It's so great. It was so great that it was screened at a competition in the 1963 Cannes Film Festival. So Sontag talks about all of these filmmakers, and she wonders how these films have not been overrun by interpreters. And so she mulls over and thinks, is it because of the newness of cinema as an art, or does it owe that to this fact that it's just an accident and that films were just movies? When we say movies, movies are meant for the mass audience, and so they are not part of the high culture products, and so it was left alone by people with intellects or people with minds. They felt, oh, this is just below our dignity to evaluate films, because it has a reach to the mass audience and not to a particular audience. And with this, Sontag tries to say that there's something other than the content in cinema also. So if the people were not happy, if the interpreters felt that, okay, cinema, the content of the cinema need not be worked upon or interpreted because it just belongs to the wider mass, okay, then Sontag says, okay, forget the content. What about, there are other things also that can be analyzed in a cinema, like unlike the novel that has vocabulary of forms, the explicit, complex and all that. You can look at a cinema from the point of view of camera angles, its movements, its editing, the cutting, composition of the frame, and all that goes into the making of a film. So we now move on to the next part of Sontag's criticism, and here Sontag starts questioning. So now, if this is the case, what sort of a criticism or what kind of a criticism should be a commentary on the arts that is like looked upon today or that is desired today? So she says that work of art are ineffable and that they cannot, so it's not that work of art are ineffable meaning that they are very great, that they are beyond or extreme, that they cannot be expressed. So it is not the work of art are ineffable and that they cannot be described or paraphrased. It is not that, but the question is, how should the criticism be, or how should the criticism look at the art? How would it serve the work of art and not take its place? Because in the name of interpretation, the interpreters are trying to usurp the place of art. They're trying to take it or take its position illegally, and so she's not happy with that. And so how can this be done? So she offers a few of her observations or suggestions, and she says, so let's first focus on the form in the art. Now, interpreters normally tend to give more focus on the content, and so when they start interpreting, there seems to be a kind of an arrogance in interpretation, and so she says this can be just ignored, and thereafter you can go into the description of form, which would be a better one. And for this, when you're trying to describe the form of an art, not on the content, please remember, mind you, it's not on the content but on the form. So when you're going on the form of an art, please see to it that let the vocabulary be in such a way that it's descriptive and not prescriptive. Don't say it'll have to be this way, it ought to be that way, it should be this way, it must have been written that way. No, it can be a descriptive way of form, where a vocabulary that uses to interpret or to look at the forms. Okay, so in that way, now the content, so your focus on content will dissolve, and interpreters will tend to focus on the content of forms. So Sontag wants us to focus on the form rather than the content, and she gives us a list of essays where the focus is more on the form rather than on the content. And the first one that she says is about Erwin Panofsky's essay. She said that's titled Style and Medium in the Motion Pictures. Then Fry's Conspectus of Dramatic Genres. Then moves on to Frank Castell's essay, The Deconstruction of Plastic Space. Roland Barthes' book on Racine, and his two essays on Rob Grillet. All of these deal with form. and their focus is on the form rather than on a content. So they are more to do with formal analysis. So it's a kind of an application of criticism, and so they try to study a single author and look at its form rather than look at the author's work from its form rather than the content. And likewise, she even moves further to tell us or give us an example of Eric Orbach's mimesis, which is where, like the Scar of Odysseus, are of this type. Again, formal analysis. Another example is Walter Benjamin's essay, The Storyteller, Reflections on the Works of Nikolai Leskov. So, if the acts of criticism or if the acts of interpretation could focus on the form than on content, then it will be really very accurate, sharp, and as told earlier, it will not be prescriptive, rather it will be descriptive about how the work of art appears, and that is what formal analysis is all supposed to be. Okay, so now she also goes further to talk about Manny Faber's film criticism on and Dorothy Van Gent's essay, The Dickens World, A View from Dodgers, and Randall Jarrell's essay on Walt Whitman. All of these are what Sontag mentions about how the essays can reveal the sensuous surface of art without spoiling it, without degrading it. Okay, so now besides the form, she also says that while you are criticizing, while you are interpreting, the next important or key value that you'll have to focus on is transparency. So transparency is the highest and most liberative value in art and criticism. So when she says transparent, she means that when you say transparency, it has to do with experience. So it is to do with what is really luminous about the particular piece of art, and what is it about. For example, the films of Bresson and Ozu and Renoir's The Rules of the Game, and all of these things, they are very transparent. And for Dante, when he came up with an art, it must have been a revolutionary work. What? To design a work of art, first of all, to be creative itself was revolutionary in his period. So he might have been treated so well, he might have been looked upon so well at different levels and so on. So at such a point of time, there was no question of redundancy, and whatever we are experiencing right now, the principal affliction of modern life would not have affected Dante's work, she feels. So now, that must have been a time, she imagines, that when Dante produced literary works, or when he came up with art forms, that must have been a time when high art was not very much in vogue, or there weren't very much high arts. There was a scarcity of it. So when Dante produced a creative work, he must have been revolutionary, and therefore nobody must have come forward to even interpret a work of art, which you don't find presently, because in the present era there's no scarcity for artwork. There are umpteen number of artworks, there are hordes of them, and therefore at that time when Dante came up with a work of art, when creativity itself was a revolutionary thing, there wouldn't have been efforts to assimilate art into thought as we are doing right now. Or rather, art and thought, beyond that, they're moving into amalgamating art with culture, and that wouldn't have happened then at all. So Sontag moves further to tell us that interpretation has to deal with the sensory experience of the work of art. What it does right now is it takes it for granted, and then it forgoes the sensory experience of the work of art. But she says, no, it cannot be taken for granted. You should see how, because why do they take the sensory experience of art as for granted? Because you have lots and lots of arts coming up, and so there are sheer multiplication of works of arts, and when you have too many at your disposal, there are conflicting tastes, or they cater to conflicting tastes, orders and sites, particularly in the urban environment, and so they're not appeasing to our senses. Okay, and therefore our culture, unlike the culture of Dante, our culture is based on excess of arts, excess of art forms in the form of music, literature, or whatever you want to. There is an excess, there's an overproduction, and therefore when you have too many things, you don't associate it on at a sensory level. So there is a loss of sharpness and there is a loss of sensory experience. And all these conditions of modern life, especially its material plenitude, abundance, okay, its abundance and crowdedness. It's not just having it in abundance, but it's also crowded. All of these factors dullen our sensory faculties. So we don't relate art with our senses. We take it for granted and we keep our senses away from the art, and therefore it is not associated with senses and our capacities, and therefore we don't use that sensory aspect to criticize a piece of work. And Sontag says if there is a critic, the critic must assess any piece of art based on the senses, and that will be ideal. So she says that it is very important that we recover the senses. We have to learn from it. We have to see more. We have to hear more. We have to feel more. That is to say, all these work of art that we enjoy have to be an experiential one. They have to be appealing to our senses at different ways, at different levels, in different ways, by helping us see more, hear more, and feel more. So here she says that the task is not to find what is there in the work of art or what content is there, not to squeeze as you would squeeze it out of a toothpaste tube, not to squeeze the content out of it. Rather, you reduce the content and experience it, see what's there, hear what is there, and feel what is there, instead of trying to say what is the content. Okay, try to feel the content. And therefore, whenever you try to criticize a piece of art, whenever you try to appreciate a piece of art or interpret a piece of art, you should do it by analogy, by comparison, and you should do it by your own experience rather than treating it that should be really fine. And so what is the real function of criticism? It is how it is, what it is, even that is what it is, rather than show what it means. So don't focus on the meaning part of it. See how it looks, how it makes you feel, what you experience out of it, rather than focusing only on the meaning part of it. So she concludes the essay with the 10th part. So Sontag had divided her whole essay into 10 parts, and the 10th part ironically has only one emphatic sentence where she says, so in the place of hermeneutics is the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation. So instead of hermeneutics, let the art be an art or an erotics of art. So when you deal with art, let it be an erotics of art. Erotic, it doesn't have to deal with the lust, but it's to do with the senses. So Sontag wants us to interpret anything from the point of view of our sensory perceptions, rather than on the point of view of sheer interpretations or meanings. So that's it. Thank you for your patient watching. I hope it was clear to you. In case you have any queries, you can always contact me. Have a blessed day.